So welcome to Thrive, Lead, Succeed. As I mentioned, our first webinar for the Leadership Circle. And I'm super excited today to talk to you about 5D leadership. It's a concept that I've been developing through conversations with some of my mentors and people that I value their opinions on. And this is the evolution of really my leadership practice, and I wanted to share it all with you. So when you think about the evolution of leadership over the years and the history of leadership, if you think about the industrial age, okay, of kind of the industrial revolution, the leadership style, it was very much command and control, very centralized, very directive. Excuse me, there's someone that's just joining. I'm just going to, next time I will assign this to somebody else. Apologies. As I mentioned, the history of the industrial age, if you think about that, it was very authoritative, very command and control. Oh, I'm just gonna, whoops, sorry, hang on. Previous. Command and control. And, you know, people had leaders and, people had followers because of their power of their position only, okay? So do what you say because I have authority over you and I can control your career development. So that's, and if you think about that today, even in the corporate world, there are quite a few corporations that still follow this leadership style. And there's a lot of centralized control and a lot of direction, and a lot of leaders are asked to execute versus develop their own strategy. So it still exists today. But I think you probably agree with me that it doesn't get you too far from building trust and teamwork and really loyalty with your teams. And especially today with today's generation and the advent of technology, people are really expecting, and you can see the quote on the slide with millennials. I mean, millennials are expecting a collaborative environment with leaders that they can be involved with, share their opinion, and have a real and make a real contribution. So that kind of moves us a little bit to more the collaborative evolution of leadership. And this really came about from an industrial point of view with the whole automotive sector with Kaizen, if you remember, in Six Sigma, and the advent of all of this, getting the teams to problem solve together and to come up with ideas together about how to improve and how to have continuous process improvement in organizations. Previous to that, you might have leaders that have good team skills. I'm sure, of course, that exists, but it wasn't as commonplace for leadership training and team training as it was after the introduction of those types of leadership disciplines. And so when you're collaborating, it's much more team focused, much more, which is where you're starting to involve people and work with them and get their opinion. And this is where you need to have listening skills and develop more as a leader. So then we're on the brink of another evolution of leadership, which is really transformative leaders. And if you think about the advent, as I mentioned, of technology and the new millennials and the new generations, not just millennials, the new generations of leaders that are coming, and all the ways that we're working remotely together, and just look at this Teams environment that we're all using today, and this technology where we can see and hear each other through the web. Leaders are looking today, and even individual contributors are looking for a way to contribute as more of a partner, contribute as an autonomous member of a team, and they want to be respected that way. There is less of the, I'm subservient to you and you because you're the boss, and there's much more expectation of autonomy in their contribution. And leaders here in this evolution are also they can create change, cause change, and transform people. It might be it might be their mind, it might be their heart, it might be their life. It depends, but it's transformative. Okay, so that's kind of the evolution, and it got me thinking about really the different dimensions of leadership. So I'm introducing to you today the concept of 3D, 4D and 5D leadership. And if you think about this, we're going to go a little deeper now into what these leadership dimensions are. So in 3D leadership, and we're all very, very familiar with this type of leadership. This is the hierarchical leadership. This is very competitive based. We're always very interested in not just comparing ourselves to industries we compete with or organizations we compete with, but we compare ourselves to each other. We compare our people that report to us on our team. It's a very comparative system. And of course, it's centralized, command, control, and very directive. Financial power is also very important here. This does not mean that when you're in another dimension that you don't want to make money. I do not mean that at all. But financial power dominates the discussion and the process and the whole leadership philosophy, winning and improving a financial gain. And this is where, as a leader, you're really involved in measuring activities, ensuring the work is done, and again, you're giving direction a lot. When you move into 4D, the fourth dimension, this is where you start to really have a lot of what I call magic can happen. So this is where you're not just pushing communication down. This is where you're getting communication to work two ways. There's a greater emphasis on teamwork, a greater emphasis on engagement with stakeholders and colleagues. And all of you have been through a program with me, and you know I talk a lot about the clusters and influencing clusters, and how leaders today need to broaden their scope of what they're looking at and develop their ability to wield influence across different groups of people with an organization. So this is where you're starting to build your influential skills. It's not just by the position itself of power that allows people to follow you. It's because people want to follow you. And your decision-making ability, it makes sense. Okay, they feel that they'd like to follow you. This is where you start also as a leader thinking about measuring value versus activities versus KPIs, looking at the value a leader brings, the value to the team, the value to the organization, and the value to the community, or the world at large. And so this is the collaborative dimension. And as I mentioned, we're on the cusp of really moving into a much more transformative dimension. And this is where it gets really interesting for leaders, and rewarding, but challenging, because communication is not just one way or two way, it's transparent, or most of it is transparent. And you have to be comfortable with sharing power with people, and sharing decision making. You still act as the leader, and there will still always be certain decisions that are made at your level. However, you clearly delineate which areas can be shared power and where there's shared decision making opportunities, so people understand, and you get better at giving more and more of that power to the people in your organization. This is also where peers hold peers accountable. It's not just the leader determining if people on a team are performing and contributing. Peers actually, through that level of self-leadership, they actually hold each other accountable. And so this is a great step when you can get to this advancement in your leadership ability, because you do not have to take that role all the time. Someone else on the team will do that for you. The organizations become a little flatter. As I mentioned, autonomy is more important. And it becomes, through this work, much more creative and innovative. You may find when you're operating in 3D, you're wondering why your people aren't creative, or why you can't get any input, or no one responds to the input box. It's probably because people are feeling that direct, centralized control, and not feeling like it's an environment that is susceptible to creation and innovation. And this is where leaders become more mindful and in the moment. And this is probably one of the hardest things for people to do, is to stay focused and stay in the moment. But when you do that, you can adapt quicker. You can even make some decisions quicker when you're in the moment with people. And also vision, there's strategy in all dimensions, okay? Someone asked me recently, is there only strategy? And no, there's strategy in every, it's just different strategies. The strategy in the fifth dimension is much more global. It's much more broader. It's not just focused on financial power, but resonating with values that people have and why they work, why they want to work for you. And again, it's all about transformation. So it's interesting. I hope you're finding. I find this fascinating, and I think that as a leader, it's quite interesting to know how do we move between dimensions, or do you find one track of leadership style and stay there? So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about what we do as a leader in each dimension. So when you're in the third dimension, which is that hierarchical dimension, you're supervising. You're tracking, you're measuring, okay? You're comparing and you're directing. So that's how you're going to know when you're in that mode. When you're in the fourth dimension, you're listening, okay? You're involving, you're engaging, you're working on growing. You're very interested in career development here. This is where you're doing the coaching and the development of talent, and you're collaborating with people, okay? And finally, when you're in the fifth, this is creation. This is innovation. This is where you're creating change, okay? You're enabling leaders to self-lead, to think about their own role in the organization and leading themselves, this autonomous leadership piece we talked about. And this is also where you're fully sustaining leaders, and sustaining employees. And I've created also an employee sustainability model that I will share with you in a few sessions. And that is really about a broader look at when we talk about retaining an employee and then engaging an employee. And I say it's not complete until you sustain them and you're giving them something that sustains them as a person, and their work life is so important to them. So this is the dimension where you can do that. And so it's important when you think about it, of the types of things that you do in each dimension. And it's important that you can move between each dimension. You know, one of the things that we talk about in coaching is executive competency development. And I know spent a lot of time with all of you on that. And so I thought it'd be interesting to you to see what competencies are associated with which dimension. So if you think about, again, the 3D area, this is your supervisory skills. This is making the communication extremely clear, because remember, this is all about execution. So you need to be a good communicator here, but you're more interested in making the communication fairly simple and fairly clear so that people can follow the direction. Again, you're measuring. You have to have the ability to follow through and be consistent in your measurement. This is reporting is very important, and financial reports, data integrity, and of course, getting the job done. Can you deliver the results as a leader? And is your team following the strategy that is set up? And can you actually deliver and manage those outcomes? Okay, so it's very important. Those are all the skills that you would be using. In 4D, you need different types of skills. Okay, first of all, this is when people are starting to follow you because you're influential. So you're becoming more of a role model here. So it's very, very important that you're self-managing. What does that mean? You're exhibiting the values that you want others exhibiting. You're not asking someone for something and showing up and doing something like that's not ethical or isn't aligned with the values. It means that you're a hard worker. You're committed to the organization. You're doing things that you'd ask other people to do. So it's that role model self-management component that's so important. You're still communicating, but it's more strategic. It's a different level of communication than in 3D. This is where you're getting alongside someone and coaching and developing them and helping them succeed, where you're focusing on teams. And this is where you're really focusing, again, on creating a collaborative approach. And you might even start collaborating across teams in an organization and wielding broader influence here and making a contribution outside your team, okay, in 4D, because of all those great skills. And this is where you're starting to really involve and grow your teams. Finally, in 5D, I'm sure you're thinking, what are some of the competencies there, and how often do I exhibit them? So this is really setting a broader vision, and this doesn't necessarily, I'm not talking about world changing here, but just for your function or your department or your team, something that resonates with the values that your team has, and you have a vision of where you want to go and what you stand for, and it's bigger picture than just meeting your Q2 objectives. This is also where you're leading by values at all times, and where you have much stronger emotional and social intelligence on display at all times. In the fourth dimension, you have to have emotional and social intelligence too, because you're with teams. But I put it in the fifth dimension because I just think it fits so much better there. You can't really be a successful 5D leader without having those chops. And this is where you're developing partnerships and alliances much broader. So you need skills to identify, who strategically for this vision to be achieved, who do I need to ally with? Who would be a great even organization or community advocate outside of the organization that would be a great partner for us to achieve our vision? And not all leaders can think through those things and identify the right partners and then build that relationship. Those are 5D attributes. This is also where you identify your own learning agility. You have to be open to feedback and be on the path to making yourself the best leader you can. And this means you're not always right. You don't always have all the answers. And sometimes it's hard as a leader to admit that you don't. But that's part of it. And it makes it safe for people to fail on your team when the leader can fail as well. I mean, obviously we don't want to fail very often, but we need to be able to. Of course, this is all about market opportunities, value creation, and the value ties to the bigger picture. So I'm hoping this helps you, and this is where you're really connecting with your employees on a personal level and sustaining them. Hoping that helps a little bit around what type of competencies you need to move through the dimensions. So you might be thinking, is one dimension better than the others? How do I move between them? Are they all relevant? And yes, the answer is yes, they're all relevant. Obviously, in the third dimension, we talked about leaders needing to supervise and track and monitor. And I don't know too many situations that you don't have to do that from time to time. But as you move more into the fifth dimension and people are more autonomous and they're self-leading themselves, that becomes less important. But you still could have people developing themselves along the way that need a more direction, and that's fine. You need to operate where you need to operate. I suggest you start using the practices from the dimensions that you need, and then adapting your style. One of the things that's interesting now, and I think we've talked about this a lot in the coaching, is that you need to learn to adapt your style. All of us gravitate to a certain style of leadership, and that's fine. We all bring our experiences and who we are and our own values to who we are as a leader. That's what makes us all so unique and interesting. But the expectation now is, particularly for new generations, is really to adapt your style. Not everyone can be treated the same way. And so that old kind of thinking of, do what I say and do it this way, and that shuts people down. And we want people to open themselves up and contribute. And the only way you do that is to learn a little bit more about each person to see how you need to work with them. So I suggest to everyone that you start thinking about gravitating to the fourth and fifth dimension when it's appropriate and when you can, because it's a much more creative environment. It's when you're getting the best out of your teams, and it's just more rewarding than just giving people direction. And this is what people need. And you don't want to become extinct as a leader. You don't want to become stuck somewhere unnecessarily when you could really be evolving yourself. So it's interesting. I thought of this a little bit because I have met some people in my life that were just born in the fifth dimension. They're just natural. They're just big picture vision. You know, they want people to self-manage. They just are, they're just broad alliance people. I have to admit, I am not one of those people. When I started in my leadership career, I followed the rules very carefully. I wanted to make sure I did everything right. I was more focused at the beginning on doing things right than really engaging people and involving them. I wasn't the worst leader there was, but reflecting back on it, I absolutely know that I really gravitated to the structure and the rules-based environment and led that way. And it was over time that I learned and evolved as a leader and realized that, you know, we needed to involve people and engage people and experience them. So I kind of, you know, and I call a made leader as one of those people that learns through experience. But then I differentiate the made from evolving, because made means you kind of, you still gravitate to one. Okay, you're made, you're comfortable with it, you understand where you are, and this is how you lead. So if you just like 3D and you're a good 3D leader, you know your directive. If you're made and you want to be a team-based person and you like to lead teams and you always want to be collaborative, maybe you settle there and you're not too interested in causing and creating transformation. But for those of us that are interested in evolving and don't see ourselves as born or made, perhaps made but still evolving, these are people that are really seeking lifelong learning, that are every day is a new leadership day. We're embracing it, and we're working on these ideas to try to grow our competency levels in those other areas. Okay. So I'm just going to do a little time check here, see how we're doing. Okay, we're in good straight. So I'd just like you all, if you've got a pen and paper, maybe you can grab a pen and paper. You might want to jot a few notes down here. And this is just a personal leadership challenge. You know how I love interactive and homework, but I can't assign you homework anymore. Sure. But this is just a little personal challenge, and just wanted to talk these things through, and all of us can just think about this on our own, how it relates to ourselves. But which dimension do you operate in most of the time? And is your leadership style getting you the results you want? Or are you stuck a little bit like I was at the beginning of my journey? And do you have your team with you? And are they with you because you're the boss? Or are they with you because they believe in you, because you're a role model to them, because you provide coaching to them, because you help them transform? Why are they with you? And are you up to the challenge and reward of the fourth and fifth dimensions? It's a little safer in the third dimension, but it's not near as fulfilling, and it's not what people need today or want. So you could get left behind pretty quick. So how do you assess yourself in the leadership competencies that are required in each dimension? And maybe give some thought and write some notes about what you might want to do and what you might want to develop further. I'm going to send out to all of you that attended a self-assessment takeaway. It's just a little sheet two-page sheet you can print off, and it's got the competencies listed for 3D, 4D, and 5D. And you can take some time to reflect after this workshop and think about, you know, what leadership competence you exhibit most of the time, what you don't, and where you might want to develop. Okay, so just some very interesting thoughts for all of us to continue to think about. Okay, so we're going to move into the Q&A, and I'm so excited that I've had the chance to share this with you, and I can't wait to hear some of your thoughts around it. I'm just going to go in now and actually stop recording.